Okay, so what's up, YouTube? And today we're going to be back with a sociology revision video. And I thought, what better place to start than the role of education? I think it's like the foundation of the course. Like, if you got the role of education down, I think lots of other areas will snap into place, like the family, even religion. Because the thing is with the theories, you draw upon these ideas so many times. And I'm going to talk about how we can use some of these in literally like every setting just by changing a few words. For instance, I'm going to talk about Althusser's theoretical ideas, such as the ISA and the RSA. And you can talk about that in pretty much any question. You can talk about the ISA in a education question, which is what we're going to be covering today. You can also cover it in a family question, although it's a bit more tenuous, I would say. And then you can also cover it pretty strongly in a religion one. And you will get marks, top marks. And that's just by knowing one theorist. You have covered like 2 ranges of the course, right? So we're going to be looking at that. And also I'm going to be looking at 30 markers, 20 markers, 10 markers, 6 markers, and 4 markers towards the end of this video. My goal is to try and make this like a concise, quick revision of everything that you should-need to know in the role of education. So we're going to be looking at the different theories, the consensus, the conflict views. We're going to be looking at the evaluation points for them, the strengths of them, and how we're going to apply that to questions towards the end. And yeah, so my objective is to give us the knowledge needed for the exams. But I still think this is like useful with like supplementation from a textbook or a tutor to you video, for instance. But what better place to start than, you know, the different contrasting views. So it's really important to pick apart, especially early on in the course, when it comes to things like the role of education, to pick, to pick apart like the debates here. So when it comes to the role of education, we're going to get 2 contrasting views. So we're going to get the consensus view and the conflict view. And this is the foundation of sociology itself. In virtually every single chapter or area you cover, you can divide them into these 2 things. And this is really important to know, because if you're stuck on a 20 or 30 marker, you don't have enough to write, and you're talking mostly from, I don't know, a consensus point of view, for instance. So you've had like 4 paragraphs on functionalism, and you're like, what else do I write? Well, what's the biggest criticism of consensus theorists like functionalism? It's going to be the conflict views. And within the consensus theorists, or theory, sorry, we see functionalism and the new right. Now, the new right, I'm going to touch upon it briefly. I don't think it's entirely necessary to bog yourself down in like neoliberalism - new right when it comes to their position on the education system. It'll be pretty mean for them to like incorporate that as like any question. But we're going to cover it just in case, because that's the the point of this video. And then within the conflict view, when it comes to the role of education, there's going to be primarily one viewpoint we're going to look at this from, and this is going to be from the Marxist perspective, good old Karl Marx. And that's important to note. But then we can also briefly touch upon feminism, and I'm going to put underneath all of this, when we're trying to push the 20 to kind of 30 mark higher bands, like we're trying to get the top marks, we're going to pick cage analysis here. And then within that, we're going to put postmodernism. Because I think there's a reason why the exam board makes you cover postmodernism. Because it really shows you understand the area. And examiners are looking for that, because 90% of the people who are writing the 30 marker in our exams come June are not going to talk about postmodernism in these kind of questions. They're not, because it's not that they don't understand it. It's just postmodernism in itself is quite hard to incorporate. So when you incorporate it and it's applied well, postmodernism can smash you really top marks. Like, it will really impress the examiner. So we'll go to that towards the end. But anyway, I think we should start with functionalism, and we'll go over the basic ideas of functionalism itself. What do they believe? So importantly, it's a consensus theory. Now, what is a consensus theory? A consensus theory is a theory which sees social order as being very important. And to maintain social order, we all need to have a common set of values. and ideals and goals. Values, ideals, and do you mind my handwriting, guys? Ideals and goals. And this is what maintains social order. Because if everybody had their own set of goals, their own set of ideals, and their own set of values, we would not have a consensus within society. It will be a hyper atomized, individualistic society, which they fear, because social order equals the organic analogy. So the organic analogy is paramount to functionalism. And in any 10 marker, 20 marker, or 30 marker, to talk about the organic analogy in, let's say, an introduction, or just briefly going over it, will really show that you understand the theory as a whole. So they believe that society is like an organic body, right? The body is made up of interdependent parts, internal organs. And what happens if one of these organs fail? So do the other ones, or they become heavily more strained or weakened. And society is also the same. Equals same. Therefore, the organs of society are institutions. And if you want to pause the video and try and have a guess what some of these institutions are, that would be a pretty good place to start. But I'm just going to go over it now. So we have three main ones we cover in sociology. You can really think deeply into this, but I'm just going to go over the three main important ones. There are more important ones, but the ones we're going to be talking about, in the role of education. So number one is quite clearly education itself is very important. I'm going to talk about why it's important, because it's all good and all to say, yes, education is part of the organic analogy in a 10 or a 20 marker, but you're not saying why it's important to them. And we'll go into that in a minute. We'll go into that in a second. Then we have number two, which is the family. And then number three, I'm going to put media with a question mark, like in brackets, and also religion in brackets, because you could argue religion, according to functionalists like Durkheim, fulfills the same function as education. We're going to go into this in a minute. But as a whole, these are the three areas functionists, really take a big interest into. So, yeah. Now, why is it important? What is the importance of education? It's to transmit values. And I'm going to underline transmit, because this is going to be very important later. Transmit shared values. Shared values. And the reason why they want to transmit shared values is because if we don't have a common set of shared values, we would all be selfishly pursuing our own desires. And if we're all selfishly pursuing our own desires, then we don't have a consensus in society, which we mentioned earlier. And this, therefore, will lead to what they called anomie. This becomes more important later, but you could still mention it now, and it'd be a pretty good point. Anomie. And the reason why shared values is important is going to lead to one of the first factors we talk about what functionists believe education fulfills. So we're going to leave family and religion and media here, because we are talking about the role of education here, not family or media. I'm going to go over some of the key functions that education performs. So that was like a bit of a background to functionalism. And we're going to talk about why education transmits shared values and how that benefits society. Because remember, they take a positive view. They're a consensus theory. They believe these institutions are good. They help us. Positive theory equals good. So ultimately, they're going to be arguing in favor of the education system. That is completely fine, the way it's working right now, and nothing really needs to be changed. This is because it fulfills key functions. So key function number one is social solidarity. Some of you guys might know there's a social cohesion or social integration. That they literally all mean the same thing, pretty much. And they all, are good points to talk about. And the reason why social solidarity is so important is because it brings society together. Because And by the way, a sociologist to put behind this is Durkheim. So you can say Durkheim believes education, performs, allows people to have greater social solidarity within society. And then you can talk about what social solidarity is. Now, social solidarity is where, people are greatly integrated with one another. There is a common set of values and ideals which we all share, and society feels cohesive. We're all a part of one functioning body, healthy body. Now, the reason why this is important is because the modern division... and then you can talk about the organic analogy here. Sorry, I'm so sorry. And then in number 2, you can kind of stem from this. So we're looking at Durkheim's ideas right now. Number 2 is it provides specialist skills. Provides special skills. So we just write special skills. And it does this because, it's what I was mentioning earlier, that modern society has a very complex division of labour. So very important to functionalism is the fact that we live in a modern society. That in a pre-industrial society, so by modern they mean industrial society. In pre-modern industrial societies, we saw there was a much more simple economy. Life was much more simple. We had shared values and ideals. However, once industrialization became a thing, modernism started to become, a bit of a problem. We're starting to have all these industries, and we need to assign people to different industries. For instance, we're starting to have more bike manufacturers, motorbike manufacturers, and we're starting to need a wide range of specialist skills, where it's not as simple as just doing factory work anymore. We need people who are good at arts, crafts, or people who are good at the technology behind it, people who can actually manufacture them, engineers. There's so much specialist skills needed to make a single item. My favorite example I like to use is a bit of a weird one, but I always just mention a bin, a single item, like a bin. Like, the reason why I use a bin is because you have people who use the bin, right, which is us, but then to make the bin, you're going to need people in the factories. But in order to design the bin, you're going to need designers. And in order to approve of the designers, you're going to need other designers. And you're going to need bin men. And you're also going to need factory workers in terms of safety. There needs to be safety regulations. There needs to be CEO and bosses. There needs to be people who make the technology in these factories. Or who provide the technology within these factories. Then you need people who regulate the technology in the factories. So you can see, just to make a single item, you need a wide array of specialist skills. Now, how does education perform this key function? It does this by having specialist subjects, okay? So education has specialist subjects. So by specialist subjects, we're talking about GCSEs. GCSEs is a level 2 qualification, and there is an enforced GCSE curriculum which we all have to follow. However, once we turn 16, if we like A-levels, we like the academic nature of school, then we can go on and take A-levels, and we can become more specialized in a certain area. And if you really like a certain area more, for instance, if we go into biology, and out of all of our other A-levels, we love biology the most, we go to university and do biology, you can see we're starting to get even more specialist skills. And then post-university, I might do an MA, and then I become an actual biologist who can now work in a biology degree. So education provides these specialist subjects for people to kind of explore. And if academic nature, or like going to uni or going to sixth form, isn't for you, what you can do is go and take vocational courses or more physical courses, right? We have T-levels. It's good to mention contemporary examples, such as T-levels, which is more technical. So there's more physical, there's more of a physical nature to it. So it's not just restricted in one area. And we're going to mention these things again because there's a bit of overlap within functionalism. But yeah, those are the two big ones that Durkheim really talks about. And you could honestly fit both of these in a single paragraph. But we're going to talk now more on the theoretical side in terms of actual education, like looking in education. We're going to be looking at two key sociologists, or three if you want to be precise. So we're going to be looking at Parsons, who's pretty much in every single functionalism area. We're going to be looking at, what's their name? Davis and Moore, there we go, just flew out my head. Davis and Moore. And these are the two big ones. outside of Durkheim you want to talk about? I think more specifically Parsons. You could get away with not talking about Davis more, in my opinion, just because Durkheim's very easy to remember, because you can talk about social solidarity and link this to the organic analogy we unpacked here, and then that's a good paragraph. And then Parsons has some very key concepts. But for Parsons, he has what he calls meritocracy. Now, this is of paramount importance to functionalists. So meritocracy is the idea that hard work, talent and dedication is what allows you to move through the hierarchies, or allows you to progressively move upwards in society. So we know that there is a kind of hierarchy here, right? And that in order to get to this position, so we may be here, we're just a student. So we're just a student and we're here. Now, to get to this academic uni, as a student, we're going to need to put in hard work. We're going to need to revise for our exams to progressively be able to get to this academic university. Now, from the academic university, let's just say we want to go into law. Okay, let's just say we want to go into law, and we're looking at a law firm which wants to hire us. We're going to need to put in a lot of work, talent, skill to basically progress upwards to get into this law at the law firm. Now we're here, right? Now from this law firm, we might want to get a partner in the law firm, and you can see, you know, that's going to need talent and skill, and then we're here. But it all starts from the bottom. It starts from the student. We put in the exams needed. We get into university. Then we get into the job we want, and then we progress in our job. And this all happens through meritocracy. So that is what meritocracy is. Now, Parsons thinks meritocracy is very important because it acts as a bridge. So I think it's always good to mention the bridge in any paragraph you're talking about functionalism in. And it's very easy to mention as a 6 marker. And it acts as a bridge between particularistic standards, so particularistic standards, and universal standards. Now you're probably like, what are these two big words? They're not too big. They can seem to be a bit daunting at first, but this is basically the whole argument of Parsons in just these two words here. So he argues home is particularistic. That is, we have a fixed status. So we're given ascribed status. For instance, your brother, who is older than you, bigger than you, and taller than you, might have more authority over you just because they are older than you. And there is an age hierarchy here. And that's because their mum, your mum, or your dad has given more authority to your brother because of their age, which is ascribed status. Your brother didn't achieve that through hard work. You know, that's a particularistic standard right there. And another particularistic standard we can talk about is how home is more accommodating. For instance, if you're late to your mum's car, for instance, you're going to Birmingham, let's say, and you're late by 5 minutes, your mum will wait for you because she's not abiding by universal standards here. She's waiting. However, if you're late for a school bus, you're late. The bus ain't waiting for you. This is the universal values of society. This means you've now missed the bus and now you're going to be late. So you're suffering the consequences of that. And the importance of this is to basically highlight how we live in this subjective, particularistic values in the home, but education acts as the bridge to allow us to reach these universal standards. For instance, you can mention the school bus, but most importantly is to mention exams. That there is a common metric everyone is assessed by, and that is exams. And those who put in the hard work to revise for their exams, or those who are very smart and clever naturally, will do well in their exams, and they will socially move upwards in classes. Social mobility. I don't know why I wrote socially mobility, but social mobility. And this allows them to be in sets like set 1 and 2, you know, the top sets, which everybody wants to be in, because they put in the hard work and they put in the time needed to get there. And they're able to reach those higher sets as a result. And this is fair. This is fair according to Parsons, because It's based on your own merit, your own hard work. So we're going to pit fair here. And we do need to think as well that scores also give implicit. So a question which can arise, functionalism, quite commonly is how it performs role for education, but also the economy. So when we're thinking about these things, we need to think about the economy as well. And any of these theorists, even though I'm giving education examples here, you can easily apply any economic examples. For instance, there's universal standards in the workplace. You're expected to put in hard work, and those who have put in more hard work in the workplace will get promoted more, right? And school is also meant to transmit values, to prepare people for the economy. Functionalists do believe this. I know if you're thinking this sounds Marxist, but Parsons does believe, because it is the bridge. It's the bridge between your home and wider society. So it's not just the bridge between home and education. School acts as the bridge for wider society. So it prepares us for work as well. School for work. And it does this by putting us in conditions and settings we're not really used to, such as sitting next to someone you've never spoken to in your life. So seating plans, that's a good example you can use. Respecting teachers, right? So you're starting to learn to respect your teachers. Respect teachers. So you're subtly accepting the fact that there are those above you and you respect them. And then as a result, you get rewarded for your respect for them. And this is what education does. And I think most importantly, it's probably to talk about how school is meritocratic and how it allows us to read. Instead of ascribed status, it's going to be achieved status. And this is the same in the economy. So you can link it to both education and the economy. In fact, I would actually suggest for you to talk about the economy as well, to really show that your examiner that you know what you're talking about. So yeah. Okay, now I am tempted to talk about Davis and Moore, but we're just going to briefly touch upon them. I'm not going to go into as much detail as I did with Parsons, because I think Parsons does a lot more to talk about. Then we're going to evaluate the theory as a whole, and then we're going to rush over Marxism. So Davis and Moore take a bit of a similar approach to Parsons, but there are some differences. So they argue education fulfills role allocation. Now, what is role allocation? Okay, we'll get some AO1 marks thinking about how we're defining role allocation. So, education, in their words, I love how they articulate this, is sifts and sorts people into different roles in society. Different roles. So it prepares people for the economy. So you're already seeing how this could be argued for the economy as well. But we're just going to primarily focus on education. But do remember that if they talk about the economy in like a 20 marker, or like give 3 reasons how education like helps the economy from a functionist point of view, don't be put off by that question. Just think literally the same thing. You can literally talk about social solidarity, organic analogy, and you just say, well, you know, social solidarity means that you're going to be more, motivated to go out and work. I genuinely believe you will get a mark for that. So you can basically talk about anything functionists and Marxists talk about in this area and link it to the economy. So yeah. So it sifts and sorts people. Now, how does it sift and sort people? So this will be through things, exams, plus meritocracy. Distinctively, because it sounds similar to Parsons, Davis and Moore believe this inequality which we see in education and also wider society is good. Okay, so they take it a step further, is good. And they believe this is because everyone has a fair chance. We come into education, we both sit the same GCSE maths, English. If I got a level 7 in my GCSE English and you got a level 9, you done better than me because you put in more hard work. So the fact that you've been put into a higher set or you got a higher grade and there's an inequality there, you got better treatment, for instance, is completely fair because you put in more harder work. And this stems to wider society. When we see an inequality here in the hierarchy, i.e. we have the rich here, who are standing on top of all the poor, let's just say. You have the one person here. This is fair according to Moore, equals fair. And this is because this person here has put in hard work. Hard work, which is really important. And how do they argue that this is good? So this is how they argue it. It's good because it keeps society functional. So they argue, if everyone had the ability to become a doctor or a lawyer or a surgeon, then society would crumble. Because there will obviously be smarter people who are more tailored to being a doctor. So they would argue, would you really want somebody who got, let's just say, D's in their GCSE sciences? Do you really want them to be prescribing you medicine? That would be their argument. Obviously, we can contest this, but I'm just arguing from the functionist view. Would you want them to be your doctor? Or would you want a surgeon, like a somebody who's failed their exams, to be somebody who is doing your surgery on you? Or would you want an uneducated pilot? You know, these are things which are very important roles which need to be fulfilled by the most talented people. And we're going to find out who the most talented people are by role allocation within education. So you can see how we can link this to both the economy and the education system. So yeah, we're going to do some, I think that's briefly, we went into a bit more detail than I was expecting, but the crux of what functionalists believe. So some of the key points was organic analogy, consensus, meritocracy, and I probably would also say organic analogy. Those are the main things to remember when we talk about functionalism. But now we have the big Marxism, who take a conflict view. So they are going to basically contrast everything. Now there are going to be some thinkers here. So we're going to talk about Bowles and Gintis, who I think you need because they talk about two aspects. Then there's Althusser. And then I'm going to put somebody in question marks because I'll talk about how you could use him, but why I personally don't, and not to get bogged down on Bourdieu. So Bowles and Gintis, let's start with Bowles and Gintis. So I actually like to cite their study as a good example of what they try and argue about. You know, what is the main crux of what Marxists say when it comes to the inequalities within education. The main thing comes from Bowles and Gintis' study. So they done a study of over 237 New York schools, or schools in America, American schools, and found the brightest, smartest, witty, creative smart students actually weren't the students who got the best grades. And this is the foundation of the Marxist critique of functionalism, because this within itself basically, however, so it acts as a contradiction to everything we've talked about. Because if we're having the most smartest students, the most intelligent students who are not getting the best grades, then there's a problem here. Surely education isn't meritocratic. So this is some of the points you can get just from the context of the study within itself. Although I wouldn't say you need, you don't need to get bogged down on remembering how many schools there are. Like, even if you mentioned Bowles and Gintis found that actually the most creative and smart and intelligent students didn't get the best grades, and this leads to their critique of functionalism with this factor. That's completely fine. This is just to show off a bit, right? You know, I remember the schools and the study in and out, all this stuff. And this leads to the two biggest scathing critiques, so to say, or ideas. There's actually a bit more than two, but we're going to be talking about more than one within one, if that makes sense. So we're going to be talking about the correspondence principle. And this links to the economy. And then number two, we're going to be talking about the myth of meritocracy. Now, you're probably thinking or screaming, hidden curriculum, But I think hidden curriculum can easily be fit into a paragraph with the correspondence principle. I don't think you should be making two paragraphs, one just the correspondence principle and then the other the hidden curriculum. There's going to be some overlap, and it's good to get like a nice meaty paragraph with these two in, because you can easily get a meaty one with just this, and then you'll still have room for somebody like Althusser at the end. We're going to touch upon Althusser later. So let's start off with the correspondence principle. So as the name suggests, the main idea behind this is that education corresponds to the economy. So as we unpacked functionalism, let's unpack Marxism a little bit. So they take a conflict view, so we can get a bit of context to why this is bad. So conflict view, they believe institutions, so they're actually a structural theory, just as functionalists are. So they see that, we're shaped by these institutions. So they will note family, religion, media, education. These are all things which affect how we believe. But they view this, how we believe and see things, but they view this negatively. They see this as a bad thing. This is not something which is good. And this is because these institutions serve the ruling class. And honestly, you could fit in a whole paragraph of just the theory of Marxists, because you could talk about why this is important. And this is because Marx believed it was to reproduce inequality. These social institutions, such as education, were to reproduce the inequality to ensure that the ruling class remain in their in their hierarchical position. For instance, this is the hierarchy, right? We've mentioned this so many times, but this is the crux of basically the entire role of education, like thought and chapter. Sorry, my bad triangles here. Let's go again. Okay, this is dreadful. This is absolutely dreadful. What the hell is going on? Okay, there we go. Still bad. Anyway, so we got the middle class here, the working class here, and then we have the ruling class. So these are like the aristocrats, the elites. They don't want to lose this position, because why would they want to become a middle class person again? Nor do they want to ever work again, right? Or like middle class people still work, but nor do they ever want to get to this position. So in order to retain this position, we're going to set up institutions like religion, education, families, to ensure that these people, particularly the working class, are going to stay in this position, that they're not going to be able to socially move upwards. That's the main theory of Marx. And you can literally cite Marx as like an argument here that, this is in order to retain. And you could get credited just by showing that theory, that knowledge and the theory behind that. So you can literally just talk about the theory there. But anyway, now we're going to get more into the actual like studies and what they posited. So they postulated the correspondence theory, which is the idea that education, you could say, reflects, I like to use the word mirrors, the world of the economy. World of the economy. They note the economy had docile, passive, obedient workers, people who were zombie-like. There would be yes boss. They would be subservient to those in their hierarchies, subordinate positions. They would turn up to work on time, and they would, ensure that they're wearing the correct uniform. They're doing all these things, and this corresponds with an education. We see this in education. We have uniform in education. If you turn up late, you get disciplined. You have attendances. If you miss a lot of days of school, your attendance is low, and there could be consequences for that. We're having all of these things which mirror the economy, and most importantly, if you're quiet, docile, and passive, and basically soak in everything the teacher says, you will get the best grades, because you're just being a teacher's pet, so to say, equals teacher's pet. You're following the curriculum down to the T. You're following the rules in work down to a T. We see this even what we're doing right now. We're learning these theories in a very systematic way in order to ensure we're covering main areas of the curriculum. And by doing that, we're following a set of guidelines, and that is basically abiding by a set of principles. Why can't I just talk about wider theory of Marx and functionalism? Why can't I talk about communism and capitalism, more potently? It's just to demonstrate kind of how this is everywhere. And we accept subordinate positions via the hidden curriculum, which I think is very important to remember. And what is the hidden curriculum? So these are the hidden values which are transmission of ideology, which are transmitted, hidden values transmitted. So they believe, again, that Marxists believe that values transmit the ruling class ideology, which transmit ruling class. And this is important to note because the ruling class want you to believe that this hierarchical system, which we keep pointing to here, one person here on top of all these people here. We have one person right at the top here on top of all these people here. They want you to believe this system is fundamentally fair. They want you to believe that that person above you got there by means of hard work and values. And in order to do this, they'll teach you the hidden curriculum to subtly think that hierarchies are inevitable. You can't go around hierarchies. They're everywhere. There's something which is innate. And we see this with respect for teacher, obeying authority. Teacher, if you challenge the authority, you're getting the boot, you're getting detention, you're getting your parents called in. Just as how in the workplace, if you challenge your boss, you're sacked, you're gone, you're finished. You know what I mean? So this is pretty much replicating the exact same thing. And the hidden curriculum are things which are taught outside of the teacher's main lesson. So they're implicitly taught. They are subtly taught into us, and we accept these values. Now, the reason why I talk about transmission, and I underlined transmission earlier, as being very important to remember, is the fact that functionalists will agree. And if you were to mention a sentence where functionalists actually agree, like Parsons, that education does transmit these subtle biases. Remember, Parsons believed that, lessons were to prepare us for the wider economy anyway. So what Bowles and Ginters are talking about here, that this is preparing us to be docile, passive workers, like Moore basically agrees, Parsons basically agrees, but just would minus the passive and obedient side. And by just writing that in a sentence, that functionalists would actually agree that there is a transmission of certain values in order to prepare us for the wider economy, you're hitting like those higher grade boundaries where you're really showing your analysis is like through the roof. You're able to contrast like complex theories and see the similarities between them, because there are lots of overlapping similarities. And that's just really good analysis. Like, you can't really beat that. So yeah, I'm going to leave this part here, but there's a lot you can talk about, and we're going to, unpack that a bit more later. But we're going to talk about the second theory, which is, I think I'm going to do Althusser in his own video, because Althusser is going to take a little while to cover. So I think we're just going to do what we're going to do right now. Yeah, so we're talking about the myth of meritocracy. Now, what is the myth of meritocracy? So the myth of meritocracy is the idea that social mobility doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist to the extent which functionalists believe. They believe that, hard work and talent will get you to the hierarchical positions. It will allow you to achieve it through, hard work, grinding, talent. You put in the work, you deserve this position. The reason why it doesn't exist, according to Bowles and Ginters, is because before entering education, some people are already above people in the hierarchy. Now, we can note this between working class and middle class people. Now, we are going to be talking about some material deprivation factors and cultural, but we're not going to get bogged down on it. We're just going to mention it like just fleetingly. We know middle class people are more likely to have cultural capital, so you could talk about bourgeois here, i.e. they've been brought up in an environment with Shakespearean books, education, their parents are professionals, and this has given them basically a bit more of an advantageous position before entering education, which the working class person doesn't have. And because of this, the working class person is going to be put into an inferior position upon entering school than the middle class person. And we know this with things like labeling. Now, you could mention this, but don't expand upon it because it's good into synopticity, but you don't really need to go any deeper than that. Otherwise, you're going to get off track. So you could mention bourgeois and go down that route by just mentioning things like cultural capital and how it basically leads into the inequality. But don't like bog yourself down too much on it. And you could still get top marks, I think, without pitting bourgeois. But if you really want to hit like 28, 29, 30 marks, bourgeois is probably needed. But yeah, and you could talk about that and how that happens. And this basically means meritocracy doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. Which basically pits the entire functionalism's claims into the bin. So this is important, but there's also another thing you can mention here. And you could actually link the ISA here, which is the ideological state apparatus. The reason, so they talk about, the legitimization of meritocracy. So I'm going to write that here. Mind my spelling. So the idea here is that in order for education to seem fair, even though it isn't, it justifies its inequality with meritocracy. That, those middle-class people put in the hard work, they're more smart. And this basically leads the working-class people to not challenge the system. Because they believe that the reason why they were not able to get a good job post-sixth form or they didn't get into a good uni is because they are dumb, they didn't put in the hard work, and those middle-class people or those people above them simply are just smarter than them. Whereas in reality, there are so many material factors, cultural capital factors, making a reference back to bourgeois. And this is important as it prevents the challenge of the hierarchy by acting under the guise of meritocracy. So I love that phrase. Under the guise of meritocracy, you are justifying inequality, which is crucial to Marxism. If you were to just remember Marxism, sorry, I can't even say anything now, but yeah, which is crucial to Marxist theory. If you just remember this part here, under the guise of meritocracy, you justify inequality. That's going to be so important. And that's going to be really good. And by the way, just by talking about some of the factors and points of the Marxist theory, we've already evaluated basically half of functionalism. So we have got, just of these little points here, a solid paragraph, a solid essay, a mini essay. And this is not even going into the points, writing them in an essay manner. And we've basically been able to unravel the majority of the area. That is pretty much the whole area done if you really want to speedrun it. And I'm going to be talking about the miscellaneous stuff now. So we're going to be talking about the evaluation points. But again, you don't need to bog yourself down on this because you can literally just evaluate, okay, so Durkheim, specialist skills, Parsons, meritocracy. However, Marxists would argue that meritocracy doesn't exist. So even if you were to have two 10 markers, which is from a functionalist view, you can just evaluate it with a Marxist view. However, to have two Marxist views, you could just evaluate that with a functionalist view. You'd be like, well, actually, functionalists do believe meritocracy exists, and they cite XYZ example. People who get into higher sets get better grades. This is meritocracy. So you can really challenge the debate. But with the miscellaneous stuff, we're going to be talking about postmodernism or post-action theories, such as Paul Willis and these the shop floor culture. The shop floor culture. There's also going to be another miscellaneous point: feminism, racism. So we're bringing in racism here. We can even bring class into this, and then importantly, I think very importantly, sorry. Sorry. So that's basically covered all of that. Yeah. So let's just unpack postmodernism. So you could argue Paul Willis is a bit of a postmodernist, but his argument is more or less as a counteracting point to the idea that education just transmit a certain ideology, and that working class people always accept their subordinate positions. Because in his study, the shop floor culture, I think it was, I can't remember the study's name off the top of my head, but he had 11 working class boys who came from a very working class background, and he basically done a PO study and found that they would actually challenge the hierarchy within school. They would rebel against the teachers, they would disregard the teachers' values and ideals, and basically just, have no respect for school within itself. And this was important to kind of highlight how it's very deterministic to suggest just all working class people who come from school are just going to, be perpetual in a perpetual state of inequality, and that actually it's a lot more complex than that. And this is where I'm going to also bring in more postmodernist ideas. Is the Marxist and functionalist idea still viable? I.e., is it really true that your bosses over you are these tyrannical tyrants, same in education, who just want you to obey them, freely? Arguably, no. Actually, many employers are looking for critical thinking skills, thinking outside the box. And the reason why I put this with postmodernism and not just general evaluation points is because you could say these ideas are no longer applicable to contemporary society. Another good example is to say there's what CEO? There are 30 different positions in a law firm, for instance, which one has authority over another. For instance, you have a partner, and maybe the partner subordinate to the CEO, and the CEO subordinate to the chief CEO. You know what I mean? There's like this perpetual chain here. Like your boss at McDonald's, they've got a boss over them, and they've got a boss over them, and they've got a boss over them. Who's the boss here? Who's the tyrant, horrible, evil worker, who's exploiting you? It's not as clear-cut. Now, the reason why we brought in feminism is because you can always make the scathing critique that, this is ignoring how institutions themselves are patriarchal. They maintain things like, male dominance over females. And a good example you could use to cite over this is things like the glass ceiling. How, prior to a certain year, feminists, women, were unable to basically get full-time education. They weren't taught, maths and science as boys did. They weren't in full-time employment as boys were. There's very big patriarchal issues. That one's a bit harder to link to this area, but racism, more specifically, Ball and Little Englandism, ethnocentric curriculum. This is something really important to remember, because this is a good evaluation point to bring in as a cage analysis point. You can make a little mini paragraph on this. And it's the idea that, well, is education even meritocratic? So we've established it's not for class, but even for ethnicity. For instance, Ball talks about Little Englandism, how, our curriculums are exclusively British. We view things like colonialism from a positive view. We see the British Empire as a positive view, not seeing the horrible, the horrible remarks that many of these, empires left. The British Empire absolutely caused havoc and destruction in India, for instance. A good book to mention is The Inglorious Empire, if you really want to, show off the knowledge, as a good contemporary example. And this is shows that meritocracy doesn't exist because, black people, particularly students, are getting a substandard set of treatment within education. It's lowering their culture, is devaluing their culture, and it's being seen as inferior to the white English one. So you could even bring in things like systemic racism and white nationalism. And then class is obvious. So I feel like we've had to quickly cover, I say quickly, but we've covered pretty much the main parts of this course. And I want to look at like a 30 marker. And this is a question you might have done. And it's evaluate the view that education system is meritocratic. Now, lots of people were put off by this question from what I know because of this word here. This word here. Meritocratic as an image. I can't even highlight on it. But yeah, it's the word that education is meritocratic. People were put off by that. But it's very important to remember, okay, well, what is meritocracy? Well, meritocracy is the idea that those who put in hard work, those who hard work, talented, they'll get better positions in society. Okay, so if that's the case, then who believes this? And that's functionalists. Those are consensus theories. And we can see here some sociologists, such as functionalists, claim that the education system is based on meritocratic principles. Right there, you could talk about Parsons. It's based on meritocratic principles, which provides all pupils with the opportunity to succeed. And you could even just bring that into Davis and Moore, role allocation, exams, etc. Whatever their background, so they would argue the universal, the universality of it. You see, objectively assessed, like they are just screaming to talk about the universal and the particularistic standards through the examination process. So you really want to mention exams, maybe even unpack exams, like the nature of exams, and how they are fair. However, other sociologists claim that meritocracy is a myth, just telling you that's Marxism, just right there. And the education system ensures that social inequalities are reproduced in each generation. So if you're not talking about the reproduction of inequality, which we unpacked in the kind of theory behind it, then you're missing out some easy marks there, because you could just talk about that. You could also bring in Althusser, which we're going to go into another video with the ISA, which is ensuring that, it perpetually gets reproduced. So you're thinking, how do I do 3 paragraphs of this? Well, intro. Unpack the question. What is it assessing? I.e., here we're seeing the extent to which education is meritocratic. So talk about that. And then talk about the theories behind that. Function equals tick, marks equals X. Function is the reason why I put tick is because they believe it is meritocratic. Marxists don't. Yeah, and then we're going to be talking about paragraph 1. You could just start with the functionalist. Para 1, and we just start with Parsons. Particularistic to universal. And this is done through achieved status. Equals meritocratic. Awesome. Now, evaluation point, you're thinking, if you really want to get bogged down in that, although I wouldn't say you need to. Evaluation point, you could argue, well, isn't there some form of ascribed status within education anyway? Teachers are given that natural authority over you. You could argue it's achieved, but, you could just say it's ascribed. Actually, bun that one. We're not going to do evaluation points right now. And then number 2, we can just talk about Durkheim. And what Durkheim believes. So specialist skills, I think, is the best one to talk about. And how is that meritocratic? I.e., you're putting in the work through the A levels. And then you talk about role allocation by Davis and Moore. Okay. There you go. Those are 3 paragraphs. We've unpacked them earlier on. And then we're going to bring in the contrasting viewpoints. We're going to talk about Bowles and Gintis correspondence. And then the hidden curriculum. We'll do 2 paragraphs. Correspondence and the myth of meritocracy. And these are going to be however points. You could just say, well, look, this counteracts the functionalist point. And that's just evaluating it right there. And then we talk about Paul Willis as a however to all of this being deterministic. Bring in the postmodernist ideas. Postmodernism - ethnocentrism. And how this favors the Marxist argument that education isn't meritocratic. Not meritocratic. And I haven't even talked about Althusser here. And I think a sketch plan like that would be something which is, I think, like higher B, lower A. So yeah, that is the crux of this. And the reason why this will cover other areas is because if you were to get a 4 marker, analyze 2 ways education prepares people for the economy. You could talk about specialist skills and social solidarity from Durkheim. You could talk about role allocation by Davis and Moore. If you were to argue from a Marxist point of view, you could argue it corresponds to the economy and also legitimizes inequality we see in the economy.
If it's a 6 marker, it'll probably be a similar question, and you just bring in an extra point. You could talk about the ISA, or you could talk about there comes 2 points, and then bring in Parsons. And there's a 10 marker. Explain and analyze 2 ways in which. We've got more than 2 points for functionalism, and we've got more than 2 points for Marxism. So you just make the same paragraph, evaluate it at the end, and then you're done. And then for a 20 marker, you just want to have an intro, make it shorter, have paragraph 1 and 2, cut paragraph 3, have paragraph 4 and 5, and then have a conclusion. Have a cage paragraph in a 20 marker as well, because that just shows you really know what's going on. So that's pretty good. And then a 30 marker we've just planned. And it's always important to unpack the question. This question is asking the extent, well, it's saying evaluate the view that education system is meritocratic. But it's basically asking to the extent, like, which is the education is meritocratic, which we know, or we're arguing is not in my case. You might argue it is. I would say that's a bit harder though. But yeah. So that is that, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed, and watch some of my other revision videos. Thank you.